Hi everyone, my name is Guy Barros. I'm a solution engineer here at HashiCorp. Welcome to the London Infrastructure as a Code meetup, November edition. This meetup originally happened live on the 12th of November, and it was great. It was wonderful. Everyone loved it, but we had a problem with the recording. So yeah, I'm kind of redoing actually a bit of context. So I basically did an introduction into Boundary, and my colleague Thomas Harris did an introduction into Waypoint. But because we lost that recording, I am kind of just going to go back through and kind of what we talked about during the event. It was a conversation, and we can take it up here now offline. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. The first thing that I'm going to do is share my screen. All right, and now with my screen shared here to the Boundary project homepage, we can start talking about what is Boundary. So Boundary is one of the two new solutions from HashiCorp that we just announced, and the other one being Waypoint, which Thomas is going to talk about. And we created Boundary to tackle access management, right? And the headspace that we have around is like privileged access management. So when we talk about access in the context of IT, and here we are actually tackling two different problems, right? The first one is authentication, and underneath it authorization. So I'm going to do here auth n and auth z to hang out with the cool kids. So that's authorization, and that's authentication and authorization. And the other bit of access that we need to talk about is routing. Basically, how do we get to the resource that we want access to, right? So that's how we started thinking about privileged access management or access management problem. So what we've done is we've taken the authentication and authorization lessons that we learned with Vault, right, and that secrets management knowledge that we learned with Vault, and put it together with the service routing lessons that we learned via our service mesh solution, Console Connect, and put the two together to come up with Boundary, right? I will go into a demo in a little bit, and it's important to, right? It is a 0.1 release, so it is important for us to know, like, this is what Boundary is going to be versus what it is now, and I will show what it is now, right? So when we think about Boundary, let me just add here a new layer, right? We think about that problem. So it's access management. So let's get our, SRE engineer over here. Let's get Fred, right? Now Fred needs to maintain a database, right? Which is over here. Now this database is within a private network. Right? A usual setup of this is, well, it's 2020, so Fred is working from home. Right? So he has to have some way of getting into that private network. And one of the ways that we usually see this is we have a firewall, right, between the internet and our internal network. In our internal network, somewhere within the DMZ, right, we have one of a couple of different solutions. We have something like a VPN in here, or we have a virtual desktop in here. Right? That is our landing point once we pass that firewall. So we usually have a hole of some sort, right, within that firewall. Now, perfect. Once we are in the DMZ, doesn't mean that we have access to all of our internal network. No, we still have a couple of, firewalls between where we want to go. And then we can have like a jump box over here, and then from the jump box we can actually we get to our database. Right? Now this is a fairly common scenario. Let's just add another layer over here, right? Where we either VPN into our internal networks, we have then access from our laptops themselves if they are competent devices, or we are in a virtual desktop. Then from that, once we are in the internal networks, then we can call like a jump box within our private network and access the database from there. And we can go ahead and scale this out to different private networks themselves all over the place. So let's say over here I have a web server that's running an application, a very important application, and over here we have an application itself that we may need to access. Right? And then we see this more and more, that we have that access, and usually we have some jump box within that private network. Okay, this is fine. The biggest issue here are a couple of things, right? One of which I need to have sort of that direct line access from the virtual desktop or the VPN directly into my end device, or at least to the jump boxes. So that means that every time I want to add another kind of application or another layer, I need to make another hole in here to allow that traffic through, and down here as well. Right? And kind of the more styles of the application that I command, the more complex and the more open these firewalls need to be to allow this traffic through. Right? Okay. So that's kind of the routing bit. This is how we get to the services. But what about our authentication bit, right? So if we're talking about privileged access management, that means that I need to, go into a secure location somewhere, check out the credentials that I need to access the backend resources, the database in this case, and then take it from there, right? Okay. One of the things that this could be, for example, it's Vault itself, right? So I generate my temporary credentials into the database, then I use these credentials within my database client to actually get connection to the database. And this works fine, this works great. The biggest issue is when we start scaling to a multi-data center approach, right? And a multi-data center approach from a multi-provider perspective, right? So if we think about, let's say, my application over here is on AWS, right? It's my systems of engagement. It's over there in AWS. My database, it's still on-premise. All right. And my app over here, it's in GCP or Azure or any of the big cloud providers. Perfect. So how do we tackle this challenge then with Boundary? Well, what are the different bits of Boundary? I'm gonna hide these two and then I'll come back to it. And let's change the color as well. Let's go to a nice Boundary red over here. Cool. Right. So how does Boundary look like technically? Well, the first thing that you have is a controller, right, which sort of your server side, right? And this can be clusterized and is the brains of the operation, right? The controller needs to actually save data somewhere. So kind of the next step of the equation is a Postgres somewhere that the controller uses to save its configurations, its access, what we know, and everything that it has at its disposal. Perfect. So we have our controllers, we have our Postgres. The does that mean that we want the controllers to actually do the access themselves and kind of go out and abroad and everything? No, so we do have our workers. Workers over here. And the workers are what actually does anything at all, as the name implies. So our controllers shoots off the connections to our workers themselves, and off they go. Right? Well, we need to have these two, the controllers and workers, to be trusted within one another and trust the connections from one another. That means that somewhere in the middle here, we need some sort of KMS system that talks to these two to provide the keys, to provide that secure layer between them both. Right? Luckily for us, this can be the vault transit. So this does facilitate quite a lot. Transit, bam, cool. All right. So these are the technical aspects of Boundary, right? But what about the business functionality, or what about the operation or the logical aspects? What do we need to configure, right? Now that looks something like this. If we think about, again, right, authentication or an authorization, and then the routing itself. So Boundary can be split up into two different pieces. The first of which is an organization. The next bit is a project. No, let me just move this around. This is not comfortable to type in. Boom. There we go. All right. So what is our organization? An organization is our authentication and authorization, right? So we have organizations. We have different organizations. Within our organizations, we have teams. That we have users that are part of those teams. Right, and then they have our back policies, our controls. What can we do there? Right? And from the project perspective, what we have is then we have different targets. So that's what we want to a identifier for what we want to access. Actually, you know what? Come back over here and let's do this correct. So here we have, and from the technical perspective, targets. Those targets are made up of host sets. So these are all of the different nodes that make up that target. Right? And those host sets have the different hosts on them, the nodes themselves, right? And kind of the interface between these two then is called a project. Cool. So over on this side we have our people, and over on this side we have our machine, and they both meet in the project. Cool. Right. Now that's enough whiteboarding. What do we need to get started then? Right? If we actually before I finish whiteboarding, right? So if we come back to this drawing, right? What would this look like? Well, the first bit, let's just add another layer here. The first bit is we would need an agent, or Fred would need an agent to interact with Boundary controller itself. So this can either be on his local laptop over here, or within his virtual desktop. So he has an agent over there, right? And we would have then a Boundary controller over here. And a Boundary worker running here. Okay. Now, again, this is what we currently have. One of the things that are coming, and one of the lessons that are coming from Console Connect, and don't hold me to this, right? there's a lot of development going on, things will change, is we do have, console has this idea of console gateways, which are specially defined gateways to kind of do these safe tunnels. So one of the things that we can have are then boundary gateways here as well, right? To provide the secure input for the communication between the between our agent and the boundary controller itself, right? And kind of the same way over here, right? So our boundary controller can talk to our worker. And one of the great benefits of having this is because it is kind of a point-to-point connection. I'm saying my worker talks directly to my controller, and that's the path. Kind of that's the hole I need to open in my firewall. From controller to worker, I know these two things, right? And which facilitates security quite a lot, because then it's point-to-point. You know, it's not asterisk. People enjoy that a little bit. So let's R27. Let's come here, and because we are thinking about multi-data center, right? This is also possible if we are talking about the different cloud providers, right? If we're on GCP or if we're on Azure, this can work just in a similar process, right? We throw our workers over here, right? And we have then our route from our controller to our different private networks, and then we are able to actually get there. Especially if we're talking about like dynamic resources, this is it does facilitate this routing bit quite a lot. The next bit, which isn't there yet, but kind of this is where we want to go. Now, the idea is that if you have Vault already, right, and Vault can create you the credentials for these things, is that Vault would interact or interface with the boundary controller directly to get your secrets. Right? Now, the idea, the future idea here is that if you are in the correct team and you have the correct authorization, right, Boundary can interface with Vault to get you the privileged credentials to the database or to your backend resource without you needing to know what they are, right? So kind of it is able to do that connection for you and to handle that credential injection. And this is where we are going. We're not there yet, but this is where we want to get to. So kind of you're abstracted away from the complexities of privileged access management, right? You're just requesting access. Okay, cool. So now let's flip over to a couple of things. I am kind of wrapping up a demo project around this. It is a Vagrant box that you will be able to kind of play around with these things on. But if we come back over here, hide this, no, open this, hide this. No, this is not the one we want. This is what we want, right? These are the things that we need to deploy to have a working boundary setup. Or if you want to make something that is legible and makes sense, we can go over to the documentation under high availability install, and there's a lovely drawing over here. So you have your agent on your machine, you have your controller running in server somewhere, and then you have the workers who will actually access the backend. You have Vault Connect. So to facilitate my life, I popped these off as different Nomad jobs. So I created a quick Nomad job that just runs a Postgres Docker container with some static credentials. I know that's ugly. I'm sorry. I'll fix this eventually. I love eventually. Everything gets done eventually, right? And this sets up our Postgres. Once we have Postgres in place, we can then start the controller. Now, the controller, again, it is a Nomad job, and it has two main pieces to it. The tasks, one of which is boundary init, and what this does is it basically one of the things that it does is it downloads the boundary binary. And the other thing that it does, it starts off the configuration to Postgres using my controller configuration. So I say, this is what I want my boundary to look like. I have the controller. This is the name that I've given it. This is my connection. Oh, this is, I'm feeling bad. I am going to inject Vault into the solution. Yeah, eventually. Right. This is where the Postgres resides, right? And what are the credentials that I use to connect to Postgres, and which KMS solution and what are the identifier for the keys that we have in place. So we have one for our root, and this is used for the controllers, and we have one for different workers. Right? Once that is initted, we save the configurations because that has our initial administrator password and kind of all of the auto setup that it does. We'll look into this in a little bit. And I save it into console because it just facilitates my life. But it's not best practice. Please don't do this. I do the same thing with Vault. Right. So and then after it's init, and we have the other group itself, which is the boundary controller, and that actually runs the boundary server or the boundary controller. Again, same configurations. I get my IP. I say what is my connection into Postgres, where are my KMS keys, and off I go. And could I do this into one task? Yes. Could I do this automatically? Yes. I just did it like this. It's a little bit more legible. Once I have the controller up and running, we start off with the worker. Right? And the worker, it's exactly the same thing. Go off to the internet, grab my binary. Where is my controller located? Right? What is the public address for that my agents are going to connect to? And once I have that up and running, you see here is something fancy that I'm doing. And I'm interacting with console to get me all of the boundary controllers and put them in as the controller's IP. Yeah, man, console's pretty good. But I may be biased. Right? Yeah, and then once this is up and running, I again say where the KMS is and what are the key identifications that I'm gonna use, and start this off. And with Movie Magic, I have this up and running over here. And Movie Magic, I have this running over here. Right, there we go. Boundary worker, boundary controller, and boundary Postgres. And if I take a look at my console now, I can see they are here as well. All of my services are up and running. Now I can go into my key value, right, service, and I can take a look at that init that I talked about earlier, right? And I can have this initial auth configuration where it says I have what is my auth method and what is my initial password, right? And then I can use those to go into the boundary UI. Cool. And then I can actually see here, if I go back to my global, right, generated project, I can see the different users, groups, roles that were auto-generated for me. And the same thing, if I go into the projects, I can see my targets and my host catalog or my host sets and what are the hosts within them. Cool. The other thing that I can do now that I have, let's close this, access to the system itself, is I can configure boundary using Terraform. And this is what we're going to do now. So let's switch over and just grab our initial password, right, and go to VS Code and find my Terraform TF vars. Let's pop in the code right there. My auth method. Now this Terraform code, it's the straight up copy of what's there on learn.hashicorp.com. The main differences that I've added here are around different targets, right? Where using the same host set, I basically say, okay, I want to be able to SSH into the machines. I want to be able to access my console UI, right? I want to be able to access my Nomad UIs, and I want to be able to access my Vault UIs, right? And I want to be able to SSH. Cool. Now let's come over here, and if everything is set up correctly, I should be able to do a terraform plan here. Version state. I didn't specify an out parameter, 30 to add, 1 to change. Cool. So let's go to terraform apply. Now what am I doing? I am doing kind of that functional setup of Boundary itself. I'm creating my users, I'm creating my different groups, I'm creating local only users, I'm changing their password, and then I'm also on the machine side, right? I'm creating my targets, I'm creating my host sets, I'm creating my hosts. Yeah, cool. And there we done. There we go. Done. It ran. 30 applied, 1 changed. We're happy. Cool. Now, to show you that I'm not lying, these are the hosts that I'm currently running these in. And I can go over here, SSH Ubuntu at server 0, and it's gonna stay there, right? One of the things that I've set up on this project, and let's take a look at the project itself, which should be easy because it's on Terraform Cloud. Choose an organization. Let's go with EMEA. This is the one. Let's filter by my name, my demo stack. Let's take a look at the runs. Yep, apply finished. Let's take a look at the variables. I have one variable here which host access IP, right? And this is in my Terraform code. It's the variable that says allow SSH access into this specific range. I just put in a fake IP here to make sure that it would break. Right? And it broke correctly. Right? So now one of the things that I can do is, then let's just come over here, export boundary address. Cool. And authenticate into Boundary with the auth method and different login name. Okay. And then I can go ahead and copy this, and I can go export boundary underscore token equals, paste that in. Right, and oh, let's try it. Boundary connect SSH, and my target ID is this one. Boom. Okay, so the authentication can be established. Are you sure you want to? Yeah, actually, I'm missing a step. Wait, let's come over here. I want to do username equals. I think this is the right way of doing it. It may need an equal. Okay, so I've broken it. Right, no problem. We can fix this. I think it's because I didn't accept this over here. They're like, oh no, you didn't trust it. Now you can connect it. No problem at all. We can continue our test over here. So we're not gonna SSH into a machine, right? We're gonna set the boundary, we're gonna authenticate to boundary, and now one of the things that we are going to do is let's go to Vault. Cool. So now I've started my boundary proxy, right? And it gives me a specific port that I can access. So if I now go over here to go HTTPS to localhost with my specific port, and of course self-signed certificates, accept the risk and continues, and there we go. Now if I go back to my very secure and definitely best practice open to the internet KV store and get my root password, there we go. Now I have a safe and secure tunnel into my internal vault itself. And why is it safe and secure? Because if I find the right window, I'm not going to be able to find the right window, so let's just come over here and copy this, yank. We can actually see, well, now I have my different organization here as well. We have Corp 1, and I have my project, which is my core infrastructure, and I can look at my targets. There we go. We have backend servers, we have console, we have Nomad, right? And I can take a look at the targets and Vault, and I can take a look at their host sets, and within their host sets itself, I am actually able to take a look at the hosts there. But not only that, I can see here all of the all of my different trials of access, right? And I can manage my sessions here, and I can see my open session over here, right? And it's working. Now the future idea is that we are going to plug in session recording into this and kind of all those lovely security features that a privileged access management solution needs. So one of the things that I completely skimmed over was this. This may look simple, right? And this is one of the lessons from Vault. You are able to specify more than one authentication method into Boundary, right? Just like you are able to specify more than one authentication method into Vault. Why is this important? Why I think this is brilliant? Because and why do we set up like projects and different organizations? Because that means that now you can have different teams, internal and external to your organization, using the same tool to securely manage their access to your internal resources. Your external developer needs access to your Git environment, right? Instead of giving them access to your complete internal network, you can give them HTTP access to your internal versioning system, Azure DevOps or GitLab or Bitbucket or GitHub, and on and on and on, right? So if they need access to Vault, you can give them access to Vault. And because you can specify different authentication methods, you can say like, you can do things using OIDC and make setup and make configurations specific to that team. And different teams are completely separate from each other, so they don't see the resources, right? And you can just fast track that configuration. And so like it really broadens the scope of access management from privileged access management. We still have the privilege, we still can give that secure access to our SREs, to our DevOps engineers, to the secure backgrounds itself. But now we are able to facilitate and abstract away the complexity of accessing to our external resources, right? In a way that it is secure, and we're not picking someone from their home, putting them in our internal network and say, off you go, have fun, eat your lunch. And kind of that is the great idea behind Boundary, right? That is the vision that we're going to eventually. It is a 0.12 release. I think the version 0.12 was released a couple of days ago. We do need wonderful people. It is open source. If you want to contribute, HashiCorp Boundary. We're always looking for great contributors, great people. Just let's confirm this and let's. Okay, yeah, and I look forward into seeing great things from all of you. That's Boundary in a nutshell. I will now either say goodbye and hand over to Dennis so he can close off this recording, or hand over to Thomas so he can do his waypoint bit. Everyone, thank you for attention. Feel free to reach out. I'm Guy Barros on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm like the only one. So look forward to talking to you all again. Have a lovely